So about 10 minutes ago, I got a comment on my video about the SS Galician that I uploaded. And I made that video because I wanted to show how there's a massive disconnect between the reality and the portrayal in the media. You've got videos of, it's hard to even call it reenactors, like actual neo-Nazis in Ukraine that are glorifying fascism, Nazism, Hitler, the Third Reich, and all of the intersection that has with Ukraine's own history of ultra-nationalism and extreme right, genocidal, ethnic cleansing behaviour, especially that this guy has been involved with, Stepan Bandera. So you can see here, all intersects, all overlaps. It all comes together. It's hard to separate Ukrainian nationalism with this history, and they don't make any efforts to do that. When it's convenient, they deny it. When it's convenient to associate it, they're happy to, and it's very easy to associate it. Just like this. So that was a video that I made about 3 weeks ago, a month ago, and I just got a comment today that spurred me into making this one to follow up. This is an idea that I've had for about a month and I didn't get around to it, but I'm going to do it now in light of getting this comment. Seems like good impetus. Time is right. So 95 Bartos said Ukrainian nationalist organisations such as the OUN and the UPA, and I've heard historians shorthand this and just go the UN and the UPA. So that's the Organisation of Ukrainian Nationalists, and this is the Ukrainian Insurgent Army. And he said that they brutally murdered during World War II Poles, Jews, Czechs, Slovaks, and Volhynia and more. They murdered 250,000 of my Polish countrymen, and even more, because to this day they do not allow archaeological research and exhumation, and they call the Volhynian massacre the Polish-Ukrainian War. It is as if the Germans called the Holocaust the Jewish-German War. Insolence and hypocrisy. So this is all true. This can all be read about on just Wikipedia. Don't have to go any further than that, but there's plenty of scholarship on this as well. And I've been reading it on and off for the past couple of months now, because it's interesting. There was a scholarly consensus that this was a case of ethnic cleansing as opposed to genocide. I wonder when that was edited in. Yep, so that was at the hand of Ukrainian nationalists, ultra-nationalists, OUN and the UPA, and Bandera was the leader of the OUN-B and was instrumental in all of this. Let's see if we can find the bit where there's books there. So this is the SS Galician, a funeral, and there you go, Bandera there, a book on him. There's probably books on Shukevich and what's the other one? Lebed. And there's even another one that comes up a lot. Yeah, this guy, Dmytro Dontsov. This guy is a massive piece of shit. This guy was an actual fascist that came out of the 1920s, 1930s. It says here, he condemned the Polonophilia, Russophilia and Austrophilia of various segments of contemporary Ukrainian society. And that's because he was eschatological with his attitude towards Russia. He was happy to have nukes be launched in a first strike. He wanted that right up until he died, I think, and he was in his 70s and 80s when he was calling for that. This is all documented. This guy was... I'm going to show you how this is connected as well. So I'm going to show you this video from UATV English, Stepan Bandera Making History. This is from UATV, and UATV is funded in whole or in part by the Ukrainian government. Disclaimer there. And then when you go to the Wikipedia for that, you get Ukrinform, which I had open already. And it says here, it's a state information and news agency of Ukraine, founded in 1918 during the Ukrainian War of Independence as the Bureau of Ukrainian Press, the BUP. The first director of the agency was Dmytro Dontsov, and this guy was a nutter a massive piece of shit. Everyone hated him. Even the people that he was aligned with ideologically couldn't stand him because he was really repulsive to deal with. He made enemies out of friends, and he made nemesis out of his enemies. Although he did not become a member of the OUN, his writings served as an inspiration for OUN members and many Ukrainians, not only in Galicia but in Volhynia as well, where OUN influence had been negligible before 1941, had been led by the Communist Party of Western Ukraine, and where his writings were sold even more than in Galicia. So, apparently Bandera, this is something I've heard as well, apparently Bandera had a fucking Dontsov book club. So he was extremely influential on Ukrainian nationalist sentiment, to the extent that even Bandera himself pretty much worshipped him. And he was a piece of shit that after World War II fled to Canada, like a lot of these Ukrainian neo-Nazis and fascists did, and spent the whole time railing for the West to nuke Russia. Even if it resulted, and this is the thing that I remember, even if it resulted in millions of Ukrainian deaths, it would have been worth it for the West to nuke Russia. He was willing to sacrifice millions of his countrymen to see Russia be wiped off the face of the earth. This is the sort of shit that you see coming out of Hamas and Israel and Palestine. Like, this is the rivalry and the territorial dispute. This is how hot this is. And this was in Eastern Europe, on the border between Ukraine and Russia, a place that most Americans can't even place on a map. Like, they have no idea, and yet they are cheering for this shit. So let's get back on track. So Ukrinform, this is their documentary on Bandera, and we are going to listen to this, and every time they make a statement on Bandera, I am going to take a note of it. I'm going to make a list of every time there's a value judgment or an assessment made of Bandera, and then we will compare that to some eyewitness accounts of what Bandera's ideology did and some other interesting things to show the contrast between the completely fake narrative that is dictated to the West, in this case by Ukrainian state media, and the actual reality and the history, the scholarship. So let's go on with it. Before we start though, let's just look down here. On Sunday, July 11th, 1943, the ordeal of Poles began in the borderlands, where the UPA bands launched a simultaneous attack on nearly 100 Polish towns as a result of the genocide in Volhynia. Remember, it's only an ethnic cleansing, guys. It's only an ethnic cleansing. It's not a genocide. Over 100,000 Poles died, including women, children, and the elderly. The event, remembered as Bloody Sunday, is a dark day in the history of our homeland, and in order to build fair relations with our neighbours, we must speak out about the historical truth. And this is one: the genocide committed by the Ukrainian units of the UPA on Polish civilians. Not 100,000, there were 500,000. SS Elite 14 Division of Wehrmacht Army. That's the one I covered in my video here, where they have funerals. Of Galicia, what's today in Ukraine, was visiting Yugoslavia in 1940s, committing horrible crimes against humanity, killing women and children. Those of that regions were equally cruel in World War I as in the Austro-Hungarian army, slaughtering women and children in Serbian villages while men were at front defending motherland. Good has been winning, and it will win again. God is great. Slava Gospodu and Gospodi pomilage all the sinners, very sad. Radmila Avlich. No, I don't know. If you're wondering why Bandera is so despised in Poland and Russia, look up the Volhynia massacres in 1941. This massacre is not mentioned whatsoever here, and it's for a reason. Wow. Saying Bandera is a Ukrainian hero is the same as saying Hitler's a German hero. Yeah, there's a lot of similarities there, especially given that Bandera wasn't even born in Ukraine. As you can tell from the name, it sounds Spanish or something. And Hitler wasn't born in Germany, of course. Here's a list of people who survived the Volyn slaughter and comment on their memories. You can find out how heroic this army of child and female murderers was. Oh wow, I didn't know about this. Let's get that up. Oh, it doesn't exist. Wow, why am I not surprised? Deleted playlist. Alright, so let's just listen to this and see what Ukrainian state media, funded by the Ukraine government, funded by Ukrainian tax dollars, has to say about Stepan Bandera, their national hero. Weird, low, medium budget style of visuals and music that sounds like something from the History Channel in the year 2000.
One can hardly imagine the history of the organization of Ukrainian nationalists without this personality. This man is a symbol, an example of an uncompromising politician, capable of living and dying for the sake of an idea.
A symbol, an example of an uncompromising politician willing to live and die for an idea. Alright, I've got that down.
Wishing to get to the truth and dispel the well-established myth of the Soviet ideology, research
Get to the truth and dispel myth. So we're 30 seconds in and already they're going on the offensive like that.
sifted through tons of truthful and fabricated documents. But the true essence of the phenomenon of one of the leaders of the 20th century of Ukrainian national liberation movement,
one of the leaders of the 20th century of Ukrainian liberation movement,
is still little known to a wide audience. So who is he, Stepan Bandera? Why was he destined by history?
Destined by history? What the fuck? It's almost religious. I don't know what the fuck this is. Is this meant to... Why is there a historical timeline where it shows different people? Is it trying to make out that this is an upright, dignified, credible documentary series and that this is just another entry to it? Making history? How many more making histories are there? Let's find out. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Holy shit, some of these have fucking no views. I'm gonna get more views than half of these on this video than this state outlet. 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh wow, there's one on the Soviet famine. 11, 12. So they there's like 12 or 13 or something. The rejection of the Bolshevik dictatorship by a significant part of Ukrainian society required the communists to carry out a very... And this is it, it's all to oppose Bolshevism and the Russia that carries it west. That's what this is all about. Yeah, no comments, 11 likes, 13 minutes. It's a documentary. Yeah. What the fuck? What's the audio like?
Along two paths. Ukrainization with respect to Ukraine.
Yeah, so it's an actual budgeted documentary. Alright, so let's keep going.
The village of Stary Ugrinev in Ivano-Frankivsk region, the parental home where the future leader of the command of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, Stepan Bandera, was born on January 1st, 1909. It is clear that formation of his personality took more than one day, and this extraordinary person was formed throughout his childhood and youth.
This extraordinary person, not something you would say of someone that you look down on or think negatively of, to call him an extraordinary person. I don't think we would even call Winston Churchill an extraordinary person. I don't think I've ever even really heard that, even though he is regarded here as being probably the British hero of World War II. We wouldn't call him an extraordinary person. He was in charge when we beat the Nazis, but he was voted out immediately.
It's important to understand what kind of people surrounded Stepan when he was growing up.
Щоб розуміти, хто був такий батько,
To understand who Bandera's father was, I can briefly say that apart from his duties as a priest, he was a man who actively worked in the national educational sphere, on the territory where he worked as a prior. Besides, he was a member of parliament, as was said then, an ambassador of the parliament of the West Ukrainian People's Republic. And
So he was a priest, he was a teacher, he was a member of parliament. What else was he? Did he invent the cure for cancer? It's like they're listing every position in society that's essential.
and later he volunteered to be a chaplain of the Ukrainian Galician army.
Галицької армії.
People who were friends of his family were exceptional individuals and made a deep impression on Stepan the child and later on Stepan the teenager. Yaroslav Veselovsky, journalist.
So they're building all this context around him. They're trying to say that he had a good family, he had good people around him, he had all these good positions in society. So obviously what's going to happen is he's going to turn into a great person, right? That's what you're meant to think.
And member of the Vienna Parliament, editor of the Letter from Prosvita and Dilo publications. Ivan Kurovets, a famous doctor, newspaper publisher in Kalush and Lviv. Famous Ukrainian painter and sculptor Mikhailo Havrilko. The Hlodzinsky family, where Bandera's mother came from, represented a pleiad of enlighteners, teachers and priests. All these things in unison, his close circle, events, thoughts, aspirations of people close to him, developed Stepan as a nationally conscious personality.
A nationally conscious personality? What the fuck does that even mean? You have an awareness of your country as a nation? Nationally conscious personality. This is obviously something that means something to Ukrainians, but to us in the West, it's just meaningless. It's like it's lost in translation. It doesn't sound positive. It doesn't sound substantive. Nationally conscious personality. I don't really get that phrase.
Patriotic feelings of the young man were tempered thanks to the Plast Youth Scout organization. As a member of the latter, he not only improved his physical self, but also traveled around villages and taught Ukrainian history and language to representatives of the Prosvita organization, helping people to get to know themselves. Whatever business he was involved in, he had
helping people to get to know themselves. What the fuck does that mean? What, is he a guru? Is he a self-help guru? What the fuck is all this?
To be the first everywhere, and wherever he went, every person he talked to, there was only one main subject of conversation: the idea of the fight for Ukrainian independence. The events of the Ukrainian National Democratic Revolution of 1917 to 1921 also made a big impression on the young man. At that time, the young man even couldn't imagine how illusory his hopes and long-lasting struggle for the idea of Ukrainian independence would be. We do not know how the fate of young Stepan would have been different if it were not for the event that took place at the end of 1929 in Vienna. At that time, the former colonel of the Austro-Hungarian army, Yevhen Konovalets, established the organization of Ukrainian nationalists, having united several circles of his countrymen. Stepan Bandera was one of the first to join.
So there is the symbol of the OUN, Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists.
From that time onwards, he became an implacable fighter for Ukrainian statehood. This is precisely the moment when Ukrainians understood they had to defend their interests, and in order to defend them, they needed to reach out to the general Ukrainian public. It was at that time that Stepan Bandera, as regional leader of the OUN, offers a new concept for the development of the organization on Ukrainian lands. It was about enlisting the broader masses of the population in the process of defending national rights and interests. At schools, students demanded they be taught subjects in the Ukrainian language. In the course of the anti-trust campaign, the Ukrainian community used every opportunity not to buy Polish goods. First and foremost, this meant sugar, alcohol, and tobacco. The organization actively promoted a healthy lifestyle. Stepan, who physically tempered his body and spirit, was convinced that only a healthy Ukrainian
tempered his body and spirit. I'm not gonna know that one, but that's just another weird phrase.
Could take care of himself, defend himself, and live with dignity in his Ukrainian state. The political force led by Bandera observes the idea: to build the Ukrainian state, everyone must start small from oneself.
І оцю ідею
And later, this idea was embodied by all members of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. They believed that everyone needed to defend his home, defend his village, and build the new Ukrainian state in this way.
Україну.
With the assassination of Minister Bronislaw Pieratsky in June 1934, Polish
That was the Polish minister that was assassinated, and it was on orders of Bandera that happened. So the OUN was assassinating Polish politicians, and Bandera was involved in all that.
police carried out mass arrests in 1936 for membership in the OUN and for arranging the murder of the Minister of the Interior Affairs. Bandera was
At least they acknowledge that it happened, and at least they actually admit that it's a murder. That's good.
sentenced to death, which was later replaced with life imprisonment. In the opinion of Ukrainian historians, it was the most sensational law proceeding, and Bandera showed his
The most sensational law proceeding. I've already noted down when he said earlier that Bandera was an implacable fighter for Ukrainian statehood. I missed that one, I didn't highlight that one, but that's what he said a couple minutes ago. And now he's going to say, showed his courage and resilience, extremely defiant.
courage and resilience during the judicial sitting. He was extremely defiant. The trial transcript was published in the Ukrainian and Polish press. The name of Bandera immediately became known to the general public. Even Soviet newspapers published Bandera's portrait with the accompanying text, saying that Ukrainian patriots are fighting against Polish occupants. In September 1939, the occupation of Poland by Soviet and German troops ended in a fraternal meeting between the advanced forces of the Wehrmacht and the Red Army, friendly.
What did they call that there? A fraternal meeting?
For 1939, the occupation of Poland by Soviet and German troops ended in a fraternal meeting between the advanced forces of the Wehrmacht and the Red Army, friendly handshakes and joint parades. At that time, Stepan Bandera manages to escape from a Polish prison. Most of all, he was struck by the general mood of his countrymen, who met the Red Army with particular enthusiasm. When Soviet troops entered Ukrainian territory in 1939, local people welcomed them. They really welcomed them with bread and salt and with blue and yellow symbols. But after they saw how these symbols were destroyed, after they had witnessed the arrests of Ukrainian families a month after the evictions began, people realized who really had occupied their land. After the murder of Yevhen Konovalets by Soviet special services, Colonel Andriy Melnik became the leader of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists in 1939. However, a group of young nationalists led by Stepan Bandera, who were released from prisons after occupation of Poland by Germany and were less aware of the activities of the organization, began to push OUN's leaders to refuse from delaying tactics, especially.
Yeah, I should mention that Bandera got arrested and imprisoned multiple times. First by the Poles, then by the Germans, and then when the Soviets came for him, he fled to America, I think, or Italy, and then he was assassinated by the KGB in the late 50s. So he was always on the run.
Dangerous was the further orientation of OUN towards Hitler's Germany. In February 1940,
Orientation of the OUN towards Hitler's Germany, is that it?
push OUN's leaders to refuse from delaying tactics. Especially dangerous was the further orientation of OUN towards Hitler's Germany. In February 1940,
It wasn't just an orientation towards it. As I covered, they had a battalion of Ukrainians fighting for the Third Reich here. So it wasn't just an orientation. They were allied with the Nazis and they were happy with that, and they did that on the provision that there would be a sovereign Ukraine as part of a Third Reich, but Hitler rejected that and he wanted to destroy Ukraine or otherwise have it be assimilated. We all know about Lebensraum and General Plan Ost. That was when Bandera started to resist the Nazis. They didn't fight against the Nazis that much. I think it was Shukovich that assumed control of the UPA, and they only really fought against the Russians, and I think that continued until well after World War II. So it was always, in the eyes of the OUN and the UPA and Bandera, it was always against the East and anything that could come from the West to help them, even if it was fascism or Nazis. If it served their purposes, they would happily ally with it and adopt it, and I think that's what happened right up until the late 50s, and what do you know, it's happening again today.
Bandera sent a letter to Melnik. He informed that he had taken over leadership. A year later, the Revolutionary Command of OUN unanimously elected Stepan Bandera chairman. Under his leadership, OUN becomes an active revolutionary organization. To reveal the true intentions of Germany towards Ukraine, the idea to proclaim the act of renewal of Ukrainian state came to OUN members in the first days of the German-Soviet War. The solemn ceremony took place in Lviv on June 30th, 1941. The leaders of the Reich regarded this action as a conspiracy by supporters of Ukrainian independence. The police arrested Bandera and his associates and brought them to Krakow.
See, the Nazis didn't want the same things as the Ukrainian nationalists, and it caused the tensions.
Ну, німців це заскочило. Бо деякі люди кажуть, що німці мали договорення. Це нонсенс абсолютно. Я знаю.
The Germans were shocked because people say that the Germans had arrangements. I know that this is nonsense, but 3 days later, State Secretary Kunt flew to Krakow from Berlin, where he spoke to Bandera. I found a transcript of this conversation that was kept in California, but not in German archives. It was kept in Himmler's archive, and that conversation was very aggressive on the part of Kunt.
Хто дозволив цю акцію у Львові? А Бандера каже, я це зробив.
He says, who allowed this event to be held in Lviv? And Bandera answered, I did this. I received a mandate from the Ukrainian people. He said this very boldly. Kunt said, no, you cannot do this because only the Führer of the German Reich has this right. And Bandera calmly answered, no, only the Ukrainian people will take political decisions in Ukraine.
So this was a negotiation. It's hard to really find exoneration anywhere because they were willing to collaborate. They were full collaborators with the Nazis. They were on their side for most of the war and on most terms.
Що то таке собі маленька акція. Я вам скажу.
It may sound like some kind of insignificant action, but it was the most important act not only in the life of Stepan Bandera, but also in the life of the Ukrainian people. If he had not taken this position, Ukrainians would not have had anything to be proud of, and the insurgent army and the history of the struggle for the Ukrainian state would not have existed.
There's not much to be proud of, though, because they only skirmished lightly with the Germans. Most of the time, the UPA and OUN and SS Galizian, they were collaborating. They were behind the Wehrmacht and the Heer as it fought on the front lines. They were behind causing havoc, terrorising the civilians, causing massacres. The Nazis liked that the UPA was murdering Polish civilians and some Jews that they missed, and the OUN and the UPA liked it that the Nazis were fighting a full-scale war against the Russians, the Bolsheviks in the East, and they were happy to do whatever they wanted on the side of that conflict, and they were obviously on the side of the Germans, the Nazis, that whole time. So to say that they have anything to be proud of, really, is what is there to be proud of? They were acting out of desperation to oppose the Soviets and did heinous acts all along, all the while. There's nothing to be proud of there. Bandera being held up as a national hero. It's a point of shame for every Ukrainian.
Історії боротьби за свою державу.
After their arrest, Stepan Bandera and Yaroslav Stetsko were brought from Krakow to Berlin, where they were taken into prison on Alexanderplatz, and some time later they were imprisoned at the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. The Nazis imprisoned hundreds of Ukrainian patriots in concentration camps. It was the beginning of mass terror. Stepan Bandera's brothers Oleksa and Vasil were tortured to death in the Auschwitz concentration camp. At that time, the Ukrainians unmasked the true face of the Germans. They had realized that the Nazis were an enemy of Ukrainian statehood, an enemy of the Ukrainian people. However, anti-Ukrainian propaganda continues to insist on accusations against Stepan Bandera of collaborating with the Nazis and numerous crimes against his own and other peoples.
Exactly, and there's even academic suppression going on to deny this, which just proves the whole point. The claims made in academia around this subject sometimes involve denial on the part of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, and especially Ukrainian diaspora, especially the ones that have ended up in Canada. And when they get suppressed in academia for doing that, it just proves the whole point. As if to just prove the original claim, they do that. I'm going to get an example. So this is someone that I've described before who's written on this, and I really appreciate all the stuff he's written on this because it's interesting, and every time I've googled something to read more about it, I've always found that he's been correct about everything. It says here, Rudling became the subject of international attention in October 2012 when a group of Ukrainian organisations in Canada delivered a signed protest to his employer, accusing him of betraying his own university's principles. The letter came as a response to Rudling's own public criticism of what he called a glorification of the OUN being the UPA, as well as Stepan Bandera and Roman Shukevich by fellow historian Ruslan Zabely from Ukraine in his Canadian and American lecture tour. Rudling delivered a communique from Lund to concerned universities pointing out to the role of the OUN in the Holocaust in Ukraine and the UPA involvement in the massacres of Poles in Volhynia and eastern Galicia. He also wrote about Bandera's anti-Semitism and political violence during World War II. And this is another thing. If he walks like a fascist, talks like a fascist, acts like a fascist, he's probably a fucking fascist. And if these people that are poster boys of Ukrainian nationalism are all fucking rabid anti-Semites and cynics and anti-humanists, then it's kind of hard to deny that they're fucking fascists and Nazi sympathisers that are fine with entire ethnic groups getting wiped out or targeted with ethnic cleansing. It's a bit hard to fucking do that. So he wrote about Bandera's anti-Semitism and political violence during World War II, leading to ethnic cleansing of not only Poles and Jews, but also Ukrainians themselves. So, a Ukrainian hero, a nationalist hero, whose actions and policies resulted in his own people getting targeted and wiped out. In response to the Canadian-Ukrainian complaint about Rudling, an open letter was published in his support by a large group of academic researchers. So, these little fucking special interest groups that are intent on covering up history to enable these veterans, these SS fucking veterans, to keep getting their pensions in these other countries, they are willing to harass and suppress academics, and after that, other academics rally around them and support them. Good on them. So, yeah, that's just an example, and then you have it here, it even says it in this. Look at this blatant denialism from state media.
Of Ukrainian statehood, an enemy of the Ukrainian people. However, anti-Ukrainian propaganda continues to insist on accusations against Stepan Bandera of collaborating with the Nazis and numerous crimes against his own and other peoples.
See that? What was it said again? Anti-Ukrainian propaganda. And this is something they'll do as well. They'll say it's Russian propaganda. It's just fucking history. It's just scholarship, evidence-based historical analysis, examination of documented history. That's what this is, and they say it's propaganda. So, credibility is shot to shit, as if all of the Ghost of Kiev and all that crap didn't already do that. If you're in the West and you're trying to make sense of this is where you should start paying attention and realise that this is all fucking bullshit.
Honestly speaking, the most common myths about Bandera are contrary to true facts. Indeed, Bandera had nothing
True facts. There you go. There's a pleonasm just to bolster the credibility a little bit more.
to do with what happened on Ukrainian lands during the war, for the simple reason that he was arrested and served his time either in prisons or in concentration camps. His opportunity to have influence
The Nazis imprisoned in concentration camps, their own fucking Nazis, it doesn't mean anything. See how these weak-ass gotcha retorts are offered up when there's just nothing better?
over some developments of the Ukrainian movement was minimal or simply impossible. There was a cult of Bandera, and Ukrainian people used this cult and often called themselves adherents.
It is a cult, and all cults have dogma, and the dogma in this cult is that Stepan Bandera's a hero, and he would never do anything bad.
Of Bandera. So their enemies also called them adherents of Bandera. But in any case, it did not mean that Bandera led them. In fact, the leaders of this movement actually lived exactly on Ukrainian lands. After the war, Stepan Bandera had the opportunity to settle in any European provincial town and enjoy a quiet family life.
Good luck.
However, he preferred the long struggle with the Soviet authorities, full of hardships and dangers. As head of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, Bandera understood perfectly well what role he played and how dangerous he was to his enemies. After he had been elected as head of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, again in 1955, realizing his role, he said with a bit of humor, "I accept this verdict." Agents of the Soviet Special Services did not abandon attempts to abduct or liquidate the leader of the Ukrainian nationalists. In the period of 1947 to 1959, the security service of the OUN, in cooperation with the German criminal police, managed to thwart several attempts to kill Bandera. But
Also, the CIA, so America, helped all of these people evade the KGB. The most prominent one is, I think his name is Mykola Lebed. That was a Ukrainian OUN guy that was brought over to either America or Canada and shielded and allowed to do his thing in academia, continue to proliferate all of his ideas for, I think, decades. And he was... let's have a look at him. Yeah, it's funny how there's just so much of this bullshit. The fucking Soviets and the KGB go after these Nazis just like all of these Jewish Holocaust memorial foundations go after Nazis and ex-SS and try to hold them accountable or even assassinate them. And then you have the West trying to shield and shelter them, just like the Catholic Church shields and shelters pedos and moves them around and hides them. It's the same bullshit. So Mykola Lebed, there's so much on this. Like, you have declassified documents that show how the CIA... Look at this. The CIA project name for the operation was Aerodynamic. Whatever the fuck that's supposed to mean. Cringe. The report stated that as late as 1991, the CIA, for fear of compromising the operation and triggering outrage within the Ukrainian emigre community, shielded Lebed from prosecution for war crimes by preventing the United States Department of Justice's Office of Special Investigations from learning about his wartime connections to the Nazis. He died in 1998. And that was the leader of the OUNB, so the Banderite wing of the OUN, responsible for the genocide of Poles in Volhynia and Eastern Galicia. This is Wikipedia. Look at the fucking state of this mess. It would have been bad enough on its own if it was just between Ukraine and the Soviets, but it's got fucking the CIA and Americans getting involved and compounding the problem. Absolute state of this shit. And then these people end up being buried in look at this, Pennsylvania. There's one, like, Bandera is buried in Munich, we'll get to that. Then you have all these Canadian SS and Nazi mass graves where they have flowers kept fresh on them. Oh my god, it's disgusting. From 1949, Lebed lived in the United States. During 52 to 74, he headed the research centre Prologue in New York. Prologue Research Centre. This is a thing, they're put in these positions of think tanks, NGOs, research centres, and their job is to just help the West undermine the Soviets. For decades this occurred, this bullshit. So whenever Americans say, oh, we helped defeat the Nazis, oh, we fought and died to make sure that fascism and Nazism was vanquished from the face of the earth forever, just remember all of this. They don't give a shit about getting rid of Nazism or fascism. It's fucking perfectly fine. In fact, in 2022, they'll arm and assist them as long as it aligns with geopolitical interests. Lebed was described as a Ukrainian fascist leader and suspected Nazi collaborator, later labelled as a well-known sadist and collaborator of the Germans by United States Army counterintelligence. So that's Mykola Lebed, and needless to say, Bandera had the exact same treatment. Let's rewind and keep going.
Of the OUN, in cooperation with the German criminal police, managed to thwart several attempts to kill Bandera. But on October 15, 1959, foreign radio stations and the press reported that the leader and ideologist of the revolutionary struggle for Ukrainian state independence, the leader of the foreign military units of the OUN, Stepan Bandera, died at the hand of an assassin in Munich.
The KGB got him. He had a pellet of cyanide fired right into his fucking face, and he died there and then. They got him. And what are you supposed to think? Are you supposed to be sad? If he is a symbol, an example of an uncompromising politician willing to live and die for an idea, an extraordinary person, a nationally conscious personality, helping people to get to know themselves, an implacable fighter for Ukrainian statehood, aren't you supposed to be sad that they got him?
The main aim of instigators of the killing of Stepan Bandera was to cause members of the Ukrainian movement to quarrel, deprive them of the national flag, to cause infighting between the different parts of the Ukrainian movement who had tensions in their mutual relationship, and to lay the blame on each other or other parties. It was the main task because 2 years after the murder, the identity of the assassin still was not known. How was it done? That's why conflicts continued, although the majority of members of the Ukrainian insurgent army and OUN understood everything perfectly well. In October 1962, a federal court in West Germany sentenced the murderer of Bandera, by that time a political emigre by the name of Bogdan Stashinsky, to 8 years in prison. And 3
Why are they not mentioning that he was KGB? Why are they not pointing out that the Soviets got him?
years later, the book Moscow Murderers of Bandera Before a Court, which soon became a world bestseller, was published in Munich. It included many little-known facts and documents testifying to the political background of the assassination of the leader of Ukrainian nationalists. The name of Stepan Bandera is known far beyond the borders of Ukraine.
So they're just gonna admit that he was fucking got by the KGB? That he was got at? Just leaving it out, what the fuck?
There's even a museum of Stepan Bandera in London. The original of his...
Oh yeah, and that museum was raided by Graham Phillips, who also, and we'll get to this, went to his grave and desecrated it by putting a poster. We'll get to that as well. Hang on.
His post-mortem plaster mask is kept there. There are also equally unique artifacts, such as...
Look at this, a fucking museum in London for a goddamn fascist. Look at the state of this bullshit. Fucking... a museum commemorating a fucking fascist that engaged in ethnic cleansing of Poles. Shame. That's London's shame right there. Who the fuck has a fucking museum memorial for a shitty Eastern European fascist?
Just the suit worn by him when he was killed, personal belongings, as well as items from the personal office of the OUN leader. Stepan Bandera was an ambiguous personality.
An ambiguous personality, whatever the fuck that means.
But it can be definitely said that he was a patriot of Ukraine and waged an uncompromising fight against its enemies. A fight that inevitably had to end in his physical destruction, but left a heroic trail in Ukrainian history.
Left a heroic trail in Ukrainian history. A heroic trail. He was a hero. The International Broadcast and Multimedia Platform of Ukraine, UATV, 2019. So this was 5 years after the revolution, as they call it, over there, when it's actually a coup, as everyone that has a brain knows. And here it is what we got from that. So, talking about Bandera there, we get from Ukraine's state media a symbol, an example of an uncompromising politician willing to live and die for an idea, one of the leaders of the 20th century of Ukrainian liberation movement, destined by history. This extraordinary person, nationally conscious personality, helping people to get to know themselves, had to be the first, an implacable fighter for Ukrainian statehood, showed his courage and resilience, extremely defiant, ambiguous personality, patriot of Ukraine, waged an uncompromising fight, left a heroic trail in Ukrainian history, so there's fucking nothing negative about him. That's all the value judgments and statements that I could really pick out and note. And this is so reaching so hard. It's so reachy. Like, what the fuck is this? How is this how you would sum up a national hero? Look at how couched and reaching these assessments are. Fuck's sake, what a weird ass fucking documentary. What a fucking weird piece of propaganda that was, for fuck's sake. And I forgot to say, I would be really interested to hear a historian that's been studying this for decades, watching this, and just going through it point by point and saying what they think about it. Because I can tell that there's going to be a lot of balking from people that are well read on this subject on things that I missed. Because the way that they framed things on this is obviously completely fucked. So let's go on to the next thing. Alright, we're going to listen to a fucking witness of the Volhynia massacre that would not have happened without our nationally conscious person that left a heroic trail. Let's see what the heroic trail looked like. So I'll read out the subtitles for this when it becomes pertinent. This is an unlisted video from a poll, and this was unlisted recently, and I actually asked, why is this unlisted? And someone responded, there is a massive Ukrainian amok right now in Poland. I think he means there's a massive Ukrainian panic. He means there's a massive Ukrainian frenzy right now in Poland, and the vast majority of people. Ukrainian flags everywhere in bigger cities. We stand with Ukraine. Ukrainian flags on TV and on TV reporters. Anyone who doesn't say the main narrative is a Russian troll or Russian sock. Those who remind of Wallin and that Ukrainians still praise them as heroes is treated like a worse traitor. So basically this video doesn't align with the current phase of truth, etc, etc. Those morons are literally eager to wipe our own history to fit current geopolitical alignments. And that is a perfect summation, because my question was largely rhetorical. I was hoping that I would have an answer from the uploader, but this guy answered for me. Very much seems to be the case. Thanks for answering. And you have a lot of Polish people here from 9 months ago, a year ago, 10 months ago. When was this uploaded? This was uploaded less than a year ago, and it has nearly 1 million views, and it was unlisted a month ago or so. So you have all these Polish people that are commenting presumably about how their gran or their granddad or their great-granddad was just murdered in a shed or chopped up in a field or shot and kicked into a hole in the ground by the UPA and the OUN. Loads of it. So this is, and make no mistake, the Poles have a sore spot for this. Let's have a look at this here. In his 2007 book Heroes and Villains, in the context of bitter Polish-Ukrainian relations concerning the mutual massacres during World War II, David R. Marples asserted that at the time of writing the book, there were no Ukrainian organisations and press organs that specialised in anti-Polish propaganda. However, different interpretations of these bitter World War II events have led to a sharp deterioration of the relations between nations since 2015. So this was after the coup. This is when Ukraine and Russia are extremely hostile, because before Crimea was seized, something like 80 or 90% of Ukrainians had a positive regard for Russians and Russia. And then after Crimea was seized, it went down to like 20 or 30%. So since 2014, relationships between Ukrainians and Poles and Ukrainians and Russians deteriorated massively. So they've alienated themselves a lot. In April 2017, the Ukrainian Institute of National Remembrance forbade the exhumation of Polish victims of the 1943 massacre of Poles in Volhynia and eastern Galicia as part of the broader action of halting the legalisation of Polish memorial sites in Ukraine in a retaliation for the dismantling of a monument to the UPA soldiers in Rusowicz, eastern Poland. Polish President Andrzej Duda expressed his concerns with appointment to high Ukrainian offices of people expressing nationalistic anti-Polish views. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry stated that there was no general anti-Polish sentiment in Ukraine. In 2017, Polish Foreign Minister Witold Waszkowski announced plans to bar Ukrainians with anti-Polish views as a reaction to the disrespect to the Polish cemetery in Lviv following a Ukrainian accusation of Polish occupation in the city. See how there's all this feuding going on? There's not this buddy-buddy relationship. Before this war, 3 months ago, things were not rosy. So let's keep watching. It was doomed to fail as they usually surrounded a building. They surrounded them. First it was the Soviets, then the Germans, then the Soviets again. Such was the case in Wollin, it passed from hand to hand. So she was in the heart of where these massacres occurred, Volhynia massacre. A Jewish ghetto was set up, all the Jews were taken there. I remember one Jewish family that I was friends with. Her name was Ruchla, and he asked my mother to let Ruchla stay with us. My mother hesitated as there were penalties for hiding Jews. But I begged her, as I was close friends with Ruchla. She had nicer toys than mine. I begged on my knees and finally my mum agreed. She stayed with us for a couple of days, or even weeks, I don't remember. After some time, Zloma came to us from Olika. I guess he went over the fence of the ghetto. Or maybe he bribed the guards with gold. He came to us and said, "I'm taking Ruchla with me. If we die together." So they were harbouring a Jew. We both burst into tears. I don't know what happened later to the Jews, but she stayed at our place for some time. One day my mum went with Olika and saw a gathering of Jews there. Next to the Radziwill estate, a long pit had been dug. The Germans chased the Jews into the pit and started shooting them. The Jews fell into the ditch, some of them dead, others only wounded. But all the Jews ended up in there. So this is SS, presumably. Next, they threw dirt on all of them. Einsatzgruppen, I mean, some of them were buried alive. They just had a couple of bruises. When my mother told us the news from Olika, it was a moment of grief. So this was the Nazis perpetrating the Holocaust. The Germans made the Ukrainians in charge, and they bossed us around, all happy that the Poles were no longer in charge. Zosia Adamska, a friend of my oldest sister, worked in Romaszkówka, a Ukrainian village not far away, just across the brook. And across the road, hidden in the forest, was an Orthodox church. So there's a progression here of who's in power and what happens. The priest lived in the village and she worked for him. Once she came to us and said, "The priest is handing some leaflets." "No," she said, "some scraps of paper." He gave it bread, saying, "It's God's bread, read it." The bread was sliced in half. "Read it, it's God's bread." And inside was a note saying, "Ryzate Polaków." Rzaty Lahiv. That means to slaughter the Poles in whatever way. I remember one more thing. A 17-year-old boy was sharpening an axe. There were also mixed marriages in Volyn. A Pole would marry a Ukrainian girl, or the other way around. So also mixed marriages lived there. If a Ukrainian man had a son, he had the same nationality as his father. So it was like father, like son. And a Ukrainian or Polish daughter was of the same nationality as her mother. So the boys had their father's nationality and the girls had their mother's. This boy's father was Ukrainian. His father asked him, "Why do you need a sharp axe?" And he replied, "I'm going to kill my mother." His father said, "You're really going to kill your own mother?" He answered, "So what that she's my mother? She's a Pole." His father got so angry that he took the axe and killed the boy. I would go to the church in Cumin with my sister. Usually it was my older sister accompanying me. So I went to Cumin for the Sunday Mass. And the church got attacked by the Banderites. They got the priest at the altar and sawn him in half with a handsaw. I only heard terrible screams. Someone else was killed too, but my sister and I managed to escape. The priest was alive while he was being cut in half with a saw. It happened in Kuman. During our walks to Kuman, if we heard a bird rustle, we would crouch down, afraid that someone was coming. And it was only a bird flying by, but we took cover under a bush. We rarely went to the church in Olika. The fear was so great we didn't even exchange a word on the way. We walked there as if we were mute, using only our eyes to communicate. Sometimes I saw people working in the fields. We would speak Ukrainian in cases like this, just to mislead them, as we all knew Ukrainian. We chatted or sang pretending to be Ukrainians. And this is something that Russians have to do today sometimes, so no one would bother us. I remember that the first houses were set on fire in a village called Pendiki. I don't know how far it was from our Jagolo. The Polish families gathered in a barn for the night. The men kept watch, the women and children tried to have some sleep. At some points it got quieter in the area. My mother said, "I don't see the fire glow anymore." The Banderites got quiet, "Let's go home and sleep." So that night we went home to have a good night's sleep. We could undress because in the barn we slept in our clothes. And we went to sleep comfortably. But at night someone knocked at the window. My mother got frightened. She saw through the window that it was our Ukrainian acquaintance from a village nearby, Bazliki. His name was Alexander Lamazda. My mother remained silent. He said, "I know you're there and you're afraid of me. Don't worry, I won't harm you, just don't stay here for the second night. I can't protect you any longer. It's too much of a risk, they'll kill me and my family." He told us it wasn't safe to sleep there and to pass on the news to the neighbours, so I ran to the nearest houses to warn people. Don't stay here for the night, they might set the town on fire. We might all get killed, all Poles must flee Jagiellono. The blacksmith, Mr. Gorski, thought, "I'm too old, they won't harm me." Old Miss Pitak thought the same. Actually, I don't know how old she was, 40 or maybe 50 years of age. But for a kid like me, she seemed old. And she thought the same. I'm an old woman, they won't harm me. Unfortunately, she burned to death along with the whole Jagiellono. And as to Gorski, one of the Ukrainians said, let him go, he's an old man. But the other Ukrainian grabbed a pitchfork and threw the Pole into a fire. He drew a pitchfork through his body and threw him into a burning house. After the warning given by Alexander Lamazda, we didn't sleep in barns anymore. We joined Whitnevsky as he had a house in the nearby village Kadzitsa. My mother decided to go there. It was a 2-room house. Once, when Whitnevsky already lived in Kadzitsa, not in Jagiellono, it was harvest time, so he decided to pick some crops. They also owned cows and horses. He went harvesting with his 2 sons. The older one was Mietek, the younger one Yanis, and they got attacked by the Banderites. Yitnevsky and Mietek managed to escape, but Yanis got caught and was thrown alive into a well. It got dangerous. People from the neighbouring villages were coming to Olika. The Zhukovsky family and us lived in the town hall building. One time we heard shots from afar. Our guess was that they were shooting into the air as it was Christmas Eve. In the morning I went to a rectory to get water and found out what this shooting was about. I was told that several people were murdered in a tenement. I don't remember this part, so this is part that I haven't seen yet. I went there to see what happened and saw 2 boys laying on a couch. They were about 7 to 10 years old. It's hard to tell as they were all covered in blood. So they murdered kids. They were lying in opposite directions. Old people, kids, young and old, didn't matter. And their heads had been cut off. I don't know whether with an axe or a saw. It was dark inside. The father was forced to hold a candle while his sons and wife were being killed. Then they told him to lay down. The candle had already burned out. He got a few strikes in the head with an axe shaft. Then they turned away and he managed to flee. At the time, the Germans were still in the castle, so he called them for help. They started shooting. Yeah, how can anyone say they weren't Nazi collaborators? And saved other families from the hands of the Banderites. And I saw it with my own eyes. 2 decapitated children's bodies lying on a couch, all soaked in blood. I also witnessed what happened in the next house. A man wouldn't open the door, so they forced them and chopped him into small pieces. Next to him was a pregnant woman and a small baby in a cradle. They poked the baby's eyes out and pulled the baby's tongue out. The Germans had left Olika, but the Soviets weren't there yet. It took them a day or 2. During that time, the Poles from Olika slept in the Radziwill estate. One night, the Poles got attacked by the Banderites. A shooting ensued. I'm surprised that she's actually talking about this. I always am, because I lived with an Italian woman when I was a kid that survived World War II, and she would never tell me anything of what she saw in World War II. She refused to tell me anything about it. I remember asking my mum if she ever told my mum, and I've still not had anything. I always wanted to know what it was that she saw, and she would always say, when you're older, when you're older, when you're older. I never found out. She died a couple of years ago, and I never got to know. So I always hope that she told someone and that it isn't just lost forever. I always hope that. Let's go back in. One night the Poles got attacked by the Banderites, a shooting ensued, but the Poles ran out of ammo. The women started to cry. We thought it was over for us. But it seemed the Banderites weren't all that determined to get us. Or maybe they run out of ammo too. They also had guns on them. Anyway, they decided to let it go. That's when we got in touch with the Pribraz and they came to save us. If we didn't get help from the Pribraz, they would kill us all. Who are the Pribraz? The Ribraz defensive fights in the village of Ribraz, belonging to the, holy shit, cannot read this. Polish civilians from Volhynia organised defence against the UPA. The village was never conquered by UPAs. Holy shit. Partisans resisting the UPA. Ukrainian UPA attacks. Yeah, these are the heroes, not fucking Bandera. Fuck off, Ukraine state media. These are the heroes. In February 1944, Volhynia was occupied by the Red Army. As the UPA was considered an enemy of the Soviet regime, the Soviet military forces put a stop to the attacks by the UPA. In 1945, Poles from this part of Volhynia were forced by Soviet authorities to move to the area of Niemodlin in Opol Voivodeship, the land that belonged to Germany before the war. In 2004, Ukrainian authorities cleaned the Polish cemetery. A victory flag woven by women from Ribraz in September 1943 can be seen in the Museum of the Polish Army in Warsaw. Wow, so they were resistors, legends, and you can see here that we only get to hear what she has to say and about what she saw thanks to these resistors. The talks were a trap. The Ukrainians wanted to kill Sibilsky. Wow, they tried to... They engaged in perfidy. They intended to use a flag of peace and diplomacy as a fucking military weapon. Disgusting. Look at that shit. Imagine having your enemy come to the table for peace talks just so that you can decapitate him. That's some disgusting red wedding fucking bullshit right there. Once we didn't go to sleep in the castle, my mother complained that we were always carrying our belongings with us. Some bedding, or rather some rags. It was quite a lot to carry, so my mother decided we would stay home. At night we heard banging. We thought it was the Banderites. I got so scared I got under the bed and stayed there till morning. I thought they were going to kill us. It turned out it was a mistake. A Russian woman lived nearby and the boys sometimes paid her a visit. But they got the wrong house. We thought it was over. See how terrified they are? Any bang or knock on any door. That's why I stayed under the bed the whole night. All of these Polish Anne Franks that made it out. Almost felt the axe hitting my head. I was so afraid. Yep, PTSD for a lifetime. Sometimes on sleepless nights these images still haunt me, as if it was yesterday. I can only pray for those people. Dear God, accept all those who were slain into your kingdom. Oh man, that is miserable. So, that's the reality of Bandera and the UPA from an eyewitness there, and there are plenty more accounts that corroborate this one. No reason to doubt anything that she's said that I'm aware of. And it gets unlisted because it's not convenient for the current narrative, which you must accept, like good little blue-pilled cocks that you are. So, next up, the German Parliament called for the expulsion of the Ukrainian ambassador for Germany. That was May the 4th. I'm not sure why that was. I think he insulted a German diplomat to Ukraine. Said he was a liverwurst or something. And here he is, laying flowers at Bandera's grave in 2015. Andrei Melnik, Ukrainian diplomat and international lawyer. So he got expelled from Ukraine a week ago or 10 days ago. They should send him to Poland next. They adore Bandera there. And he was proud of it. At the outset of my visit to Munich, met with the Ukrainian community and laid down flowers on the tomb of our hero, Stepan Bandera. Our hero. the fucking Ukrainian diplomat to Germany saying that a fucking fascist is their hero, a place where it's illegal to glorify and worship fascism and Nazism. Look at the state of this. And this is something that's really interesting. So in 2018, I think this is when it happened, Graham Phillips, who is the guy that interviewed that British soldier, mercenary, that went over to Ukraine and got captured, Aiden, whatever his name was, he's the guy that interviewed that guy, but he has been involved in a lot of this stuff. He's the guy that pillaged the fucking museum for Bandera in London. He broke into that place, and I think he got arrested. But likewise, he went to Bandera's grave in Munich. There's a grave to a fucking fascist in Munich in Germany. Look, UPA.
I simply remind you that in Germany it is illegal to have shrines to fascism.
He went to this grave, I think 10 minutes before he sets up the camera on the tripod and does this. There were 5 or 6 Ukrainian men that went to this grave and were laying down things on it. So they were honouring a fascist. And you've just seen that he's a fucking fascist. I know that what we just saw here completely denies that he was a fascist or a fascist collaborator, but you just heard from the fucking witnesses themselves, and the scholarship agrees, the whole of academia agrees that this bullshit is just fucking revisionism, whitewashing, habilitating of fascism and Nazi collaboratorship. And here we are at his grave in 2018, and let's see what this guy does. So strips away all the flags. There's the red and black one of the UPA. The militant flag, Ukraine's military, paramilitary flag. Ukrainian Nazi Stepan Bandera buried here. And I can't find the video where he actually interrogates the Ukrainians over what they're doing. He accuses them of glorifying a fascist and they deny it, and then they run away like cowards. They run away. Something else that primed me to do this is that I was listening to this debate here, and this clown says this.
Historical fact, which makes it even more ironic and strange. Which makes it even more ironic and strange that the United States and the West is now supporting the Ukrainian government, who has serious Nazi sympathizers and serious fascist problems in its coalition that is governing coalition right now. Not saying that's a justification for war, but it is ironic.
Justice, dude, you do not want to get into this, but
So,
Russia is Ukraine is currently headed by, of course, a Jewish president, Russian native.
So here is the fucking quality of the apologetics. Ukraine has a Jew in charge of the country, though, so they can't possibly be at all Nazi or fascist sympathetic whatsoever. And that is leaving aside the fact that the neo-Nazi battalions that are put in place to terrorise Donbass, they are funded by a Jewish billionaire. So you have Nazi battalions, undeniably, incontrovertibly, Nazi fascist battalions, ideologically extreme right, fascist, anti-Semites, are bankrolled by Jewish billionaires. So if you ever want to measure the fucking worth of these kinds of apologetics, just think about that fact when you're doing it. Just remember that. Because this is as good as it gets. Zelensky is a Jew, though. We heard this at the very start of all this. This is how they managed to just brush under the rug the fact that these things are all part of history and are real and are problems. This is the kind of bullshit that they say. It's so pathetic.
Native speaker, as we all know, the Ukrainian Jewish community is supporting him and is anti-Russian at this point. Of course, the Ukrainian far right won 1 seat out of 450 in the Ukrainian parliament. Also, if we want,
and they had 10% of the vote only what was it, 8 or 10 years ago. So what, did they just suddenly cast off all of those sympathies, all of those inclinations? Did they just discard them? No, it's because it's became mainstream, so the party's redundant now. Just like in the UK, everyone stopped voting for UKIP after they served no purpose anymore. They were always a right-wing, racist party filled with fucking EDL clowns, and that was exactly what people were voting for, and they knew it, and they voted for them anyway, because that sentiment of anti-immigration xenophobia didn't just get fucking deleted out of the UK when the referendum on the EU was passed. It was fucking intensified, if anything. This is such absolute bottom feeder apologetics. It's absolutely embarrassing that people would say this shit in debates. Adam Something and Destiny v Justice and Connor. This was 10 days ago, and I only listened to this last night. Holy shit, this is fucking embarrassing that people say this shit.
If we really want to talk about sort of Nazi influences, of course, the Wagner group and all other paramilitaries inside Russia are virulent fucking far-righters and Nazis.
And I heard this guy say whataboutism, like, at some point in this debate, so he is doing this right now. So he isn't acknowledging the problem, he's playing it down, minimising it, and then he's pivoting to the other side, as if that manages anything whatsoever.
Also, back during the day, even during the heroic days of the Great Patriotic War, as Russians call it, the Second World War, people back in the day were being demoted or fired from the government because of being too Jewish. That was a time when the Russian government was trying to rub up to Hitler's Germany, and I have the quote here because I knew this would come up. Let's see.
Yeah, I've got a quote as well. What was it that Lenin said about the Jews? He said that the capitalists and the landowners have always tried to foment hatred of the Jews in order to divert attention away from the real enemy of the people, of working people, which is capital.
When Stalin replaced Litvinov with Molotov because the former was too Jewish. And I quote, "The Soviet government intended to improve its relations with Hitler and, if possible, sign a pact with Nazi Germany. As a Jew and an avowed opponent of such policy..." Also,
this Molotov-Ribbentrop pact that was forged, that happened years after the Soviets tried over and over again to arrange an anti-Germany pact to contain Nazism and fascism. So that's what happened. Over and over again, Russia tried to get the UK and France to agree to an anti-Germany pact, and they kept on rejecting it. And then finally they ended up signing that pact with Germany. And then, of course, ultimately defeated the Nazis almost single-handedly. Took on something like 80% of the Wehrmacht by themselves at a cost of like 20 or 30 million Russian lives. Oh, pardon me, Soviet lives. So just listen to this shit, listen to this fucking shit.
Litvinov stood in the way, and so Stalin got rid of him. So the Soviet Union and also today's Russia has a really rich history of cooperating with Nazis, whereas Ukraine seems to be has a huge Jewish population and seems to be the least anti-Semitic country in Europe based on statistics. So you can gesture at the far righters in Ukraine. This has been going on since fucking 2014, but it doesn't make it any more true than it is. Which is to say, it's not.
Just denying reality. So you've got people here desecrating Bandera's grave. This is another one. Bandera's grave in Munich, which is the epicenter of anti-fascism, anti-Nazism, awareness, self-awareness, self-reflection. Bandera's grave right there is just constantly being fucking ravaged by anti-fascists who are doing everything they can to push back against this neo-Nazism that is being condoned by the West all the way from Washington to fucking the border of Russia. It's despicable. So, there we go. That's the situation. Just wanted to cover all of these aspects. This comment spurred me on, and hopefully I've done a good job of encompassing a decent amount of this. I really would like to see more coverage of this stuff, especially when it's so important that people acknowledge reality. Oh wait, I've got a video for that as well. There's something that I can bring up for that. in the context of Ukrainian nationalism. So let's get this going.
It's totally understandable that you want to look back into your national history and find heroes, right, and role models. But history is messy, and this isn't something that Ukraine has to deal with by itself. Every country that looks at its history, they want to see this heroic narrative. But when you dig into the weeds, it's not always so pleasant, right? And I think that the best thing you can do is pursue the truth, right? Because the truth never hurts a just cause.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully that was interesting. Maybe I'll make another video to follow up on this.